Welcome back. Despite contributing less than 5% to global emissions, Africa is reeling from the effects of climate change in a very disproportionate way. Climate-related natural disasters such as flooding and drought have been on the increase in recent years. Temperatures also climbing on the continent each year. For more on this, we're joined by Regional Program Manager at the World Meteorological Organization, Dr. Ernest Afiesimama. A very good evening to you, Doctor. Good to have your time. Thank you so much for being on News at Prime. So we speak a lot about the disproportionate impact of climate change on Africa in particular. How is it manifesting itself in the day-to-day life of Africans?
Well, this is a really serious issue. The current state of climate in Africa is a matter of concern. Well, the continent is facing a range of climate-related challenges ranging from increased temperatures, which are also resulting into health hazards. We are seeing changing rainfall patterns, which affects agriculture and other water resources issues. We are seeing sea level rise, as well as desertification and water stress in many communities. We're also seeing ecosystem disruption, and also some degree of impact. We've seen recently these extreme weather and climate events, in Libya, in Morocco. Of course, the whole continent is affected one way or the other with varying climate extreme events. So really, this is really affecting the socio-economic and nerve centers of many countries. This is a major issue.
You mentioned the example of Libya, where a flood has basically led to the deaths of thousands of people, bursting 2 dams in the impact. And one of the things that was said quite early on by the United Nations was that one of the greatest threats in Libya, what made this even worse, is the fact that weather system or prediction mechanisms or even preventative measures were not adequately in place because it's a country that's been at war for so many years. How do we begin to address that when you've got a process or a problem that's twofold, right? A worsening climate situation, but some countries are at war, sometimes with no government or rival governments, as is the case in Libya?
I agree with you. We really are facing anthropogenic factors, which are really compounding the already existing extreme climate events that we're facing across the continent. But having said that, there's now a call by the UN Secretary General that every person on the planet is covered by early warning. And quite recently at a summit in Nairobi, we've just launched the Early Warning for All in Africa Action Plan that will, be able to provide the necessary support, ranging from disaster risk knowledge to monitoring and forecasting and appropriately communicating and disseminating this information, as well as preparedness and response capabilities put in place. So this is what already the UN system is already putting in place to see that the continent, comes out from this very their situation.
And when we talk about gaps in weather observation, here in South Africa, I don't know if you're aware, over this past weekend, there were incidents where there were massive tidal waves. In it, at least one woman was killed in the eastern part of the country, the Eastern Cape. In KwaZulu-Natal, this past weekend, people were at a local restaurant enjoying lunch when a massive wave basically flooded the establishment, leaving more than 10 of them injured. Is it time for even countries such as South Africa to work on systems that warn people of such occurrences well in advance and adequately? Because from the video that we've seen, many of the people in those areas seem to have been caught unawares.
You're right. We really are building up the technology that will require us to really provide lead time information. You may recall last year by this time we had a ministerial meeting in Maputo, which we called the Maputo Declaration. We called in ministers responsible for disaster risk management as well as meteorological institutions to really discuss way forward, particularly with these tropical cyclones and storms that ravaged the continent from Madagascar and Mozambique moving into South Africa. So these storms are more frequent now. The intensity and even how they decimate the environment. So what we're looking for is how best we can adapt to this situation. So we encourage countries to develop their national framework for weather, water, and climate services that would dovetail into national adaptation programs for them to have the appropriate technology, the resources required to provide this information. But keep in mind, sometimes, like in Libya, the meteorological services provided the information, but again, the apathy to react is another issue to contend with. So we are looking at how to strengthen the communication and dissemination channels, as well as, having people on ground to be prepared to able to evacuate people, and also creating the necessary response capabilities in such communities. So these are the issues. So I think South Africa is not insulated from all the issues happening across the continent, but I think efforts are being made to mitigate these impacts across the continent.
I wonder, though, Doctor, how much of an opportunity this week's gathering by leaders for the United Nations General Assembly presents an opportunity to deal with those very issues. President Ramaphosa of our country, South Africa, spoke about climate change today at an event dealing with sustainable development goals. But will they take it seriously?
Yeah, they should take it seriously. And what we could do at this time is to do things differently, because I'm aware that many of the issues we're contending with is as a result of the way we do things. And if we want to go to zero carbon emission scenario, we'll be able to mitigate some of these impacts we are facing in the continent. For example, if we're able to have renewable energy transition, or climate smart agriculture, as well as ecosystem conservation and restoration. These are ways to which we can ameliorate the situation on our hands, as well as climate resilient infrastructure. You did mention of what is really happening. Some of these structures we're having, we really are in a very vulnerable community, such that our infrastructures are not able to stand these storms. So we are thinking of a better technology that will be able to support the kind of systems that we are faced with in the continent.
Yet not enough money has been put towards climate adaptation for Africa, in Africa, and the world as a whole. How much would actually be needed, and where would those funds have to be directed to as the most urgent areas of priority?
Right now, the contemporary issue, like I did mention from the outset, is the Early Warning for All Action Plan. That will be able to midwife, it's a roadmap now, that will be able to support these fragile economies and weak infrastructures to be strengthened so as to ensure that we really have all that it takes. So we really, in monetary terms, we're talking of billions of dollars. I'm not saying that we need to bring that chunk of money in 1 year, but if we can get so much to improve on the technology, on the infrastructure, for example, in the Met Service, if we're able to build strong network of meteorological stations, that will allow us for better forecasting and also lead time, so that people will evacuate the trajectory of those storms and then reduce the impact that will have on the community. So we're looking on billions of dollars required, but in exact values, that will be for socioeconomic indicators, to really ascertain how much that will be.
Ernest Afiesimama, good to speak to you, Regional Manager at the World Meteorological Organization, speaking to us on News at Prime. Thank you for your time.